Hi, welcome back. This is Tim Rice. This is Psychology, a Christian Perspective, High School Edition. We're lecturing today from Chapter 3 in the text, the history of psychology. This lecture is about the history of psychology with an emphasis on the intersection of a Christian worldview and the assumptions underlying each of psychology's major theories, each of its major schools of thought. So our approach will be to look at psychology's history with an eye toward Christian assumptions about human nature, about the human mind. And we're going to look at the history of psychology like a movie. Have you seen a movie that starts at the present, at the ending, and then jumps to the beginning, jumps back in time to the beginning, and then fills in the details of what happened between the beginning and the end? That's how we're going to look at the history of psychology. And in terms of the history of psychology, the beginning was known as a dangerous idea. The beginning, the dangerous idea predicted where we are in the present, and the present is represented by what's been called an astonishing hypothesis. So our look at history is looking at what filled in between a dangerous idea and an astonishing hypothesis. So what is the astonishing hypothesis that represents the present, represents today in terms of psychology's history? The term was coined by Francis Crick. Francis Crick, you may have heard of his Nobel Prize co-awarded to he and Watson, was for work on the discovery of the molecular structure of DNA, and he wrote a book by the name The Astonishing Hypothesis. And in his book he wrote this. This is the astonishing hypothesis. Quote, "Your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. You're nothing but a pack of neurons. There is no you separable or separate from your body. More specifically, there is no you separable from your brain." Now let that sink in for a minute. Is that astonishing? If you ever want to get somebody, you're angry at them and you want to say something to get them, you shouldn't do that. You should turn the other cheek, right? But if you want to say something to zing them, say, "You're nothing but a pack of neurons." That'll get them. Gets them every time. You're nothing but a pack of neurons. That's astonishing. And this is the logical conclusion, a very clear statement of the logical conclusion of evolutionary naturalism. In a nutshell, nothing more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. That's where we are today, and that's pretty astonishing. Let's look at the beginning and what's been called Darwin's dangerous idea. Some folks don't know, a lot of people don't know, that Charles Darwin wrote about psychology and offered a prediction about the future of psychology in The Origin of Species in 1859. And this is what he wrote. This is what's been called Darwin's dangerous idea. Quote, "In the distant future, I see open fields for far more important research. Psychology will be based on a new foundation, that of the necessary acquirement of each mental power and capacity by gradation. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and history, and his history." Close quote. Now let that sink in. What does that mean? Psychology will be based on a new foundation, that of the necessary acquirement. Necessary, no other way. Acquirement. Once didn't have it and then acquired it. The necessary acquirement by gradation, a little bit at a time, of all mental powers and capacities. According to Darwin's prediction, all mental activity, even that which we think of as godlikeness, is ultimately nothing more than a capacity that humans acquired bit by bit through variation and natural selection. Darwinian evolution, when applied to human psychology, brings us to Francis Crick's Astonishing Hypothesis. It reduces our consciousness, our morality, our capacity to make decisions and judgments, religious experience, war, empathy, altruism, hate, greed, dreams, everything that makes us human, to nothing more than a bunch of neurons doing their thing. Now, your textbook says the bottom line, bold print, the bottom line. And then it says, beginning with Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, all sciences, including psychology, underwent a transformation. Now, I'm saying that's true. The Origin of Species represents a pivot point for all modern natural sciences, but until recently, for psychology, that was less so. For psychology, that was least of all. What do I mean? I took Psychology 101 at the University of Georgia in 1980. And in my textbook, in the index, evolution gets 2 mentions. Now think about that. If you think about that, that's pretty amazing. Not astonishing like the hypothesis, but amazing. 1980 was a long time after 1859 when Darwin wrote what he wrote. It was a long time ago for that matter, but that's another story. Well over 100 years after Darwin wrote what I read, his theory hadn't penetrated psychology very deeply, only 2 mentions. Why is that? If evolution transformed everything, why only 2 mentions? Now, I don't still have my biology text from 1980, but if I did, I believe it would have been thoroughgoingly evolutionary. Why is that? I think it's because the astonishing hypothesis is so astonishing. The full implications of evolutionary naturalism on us, on humanity, is so astonishing, so shocking, and frankly so difficult to believe that psychologists haven't seemed to want to go there. Your joys, your sorrows, memories, ambitions, just neurons and genes. The full implication of evolutionary naturalism means that all our emotions serve solely to help assure our genes survive to the next generations. Love of people, art, music, literature, our consciousness, our sense of I, it isn't real. It's all an evolved capacity acquired by gradation through variation and natural selection, and that's pretty astonishing. So Darwin's idea corresponds with the beginning of modern psychology, and today evolutionary psychology is said to be the new psychology. And the middle, to some extent, the history of psychology's theories that fill the gaps are in some ways avoiding the logical conclusions that are stated so clearly by Dr. Crick. Now, on a side note, but it may be the most important thing that I say, so listen up. I think it's pretty significant to think that the theory of evolution hinges not on some fossil, but on the requirement that everything human, all humanity throughout human history, can be explained by variation, survival, and reproductive advantages in an unbroken line backwards through to the Pleistocene era, onto the Big Bang, in the blink of an eye from the Pleistocene era. It's pretty significant that the theory of evolution hinges on a belief that our ability to wonder, where do I come from? Why am I here? Is there anybody out there? That those capacities evolve just like physical structures are said to have evolved. This is always my first response to an evolutionist. I won't argue the geologic record or human migration patterns or DNA. I don't understand it. But if someone tells you that they're an evolutionist and they don't believe Crick's astonishing hypothesis about themselves, then they really haven't thought deeply about evolution. So that's where we're going. And now we're going to fill in the middle, and we'll look at some other ideas in the gap between Darwin and Crick, specifically the four major schools of thought from psychology's history: behaviorism, Freudian psychodynamic psychology, the influence of humanism in the history of psychology, and cognitive psychology. So that's coming up next. Bye.